I'm going to get started. We have several people who are not going to make it today. But why don't we start by doing introductions, and then I'll turn it over to Mary. So let me start with you, Gordon.
Gordon Smith, I'm the state's director of opioid response.
Courtney.
Hi, everybody. My name is Courtney Gary Allen. I am the organizing director of MeRAP and I'm a person with lived or living experience of substance use.
Great. Bruce.
Good afternoon, Bruce Nodden, Maine Reentry Network, person in long-term recovery and person who lives with mental health challenges.
Thanks. Mary.
Hello, I am Mary Coyne. I'm the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council.
Great. Ella.
Hi all, I'm Ella Capin and I'm a research assistant with the Attorney General's office.
Great. Haley.
Haley Taranko, also with the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. And my name is Joe Everett, and I'm the president and CEO of the Opportunity Alliance here in South Portland and chair of the Grants Programs Committee and a member of the council. And we're very happy today to have guests. So Mary, why don't I turn it over to you to take it away, and you can help introduce our guests.
Fantastic, thank you. We are very lucky to have two different organizations here today to present to us on both the scoring and evaluation process, as well as sort of the overall grant process and some of the best practices for us. So first, Frank is going to speak. Frank is with the Maine Health Equity Access Foundation and is a program officer for them. It is going to present to us some of the best practices that MeHAF uses when evaluating their grant and letter of intent applications. And we're excited to hear more. So Frank, I will turn it over to you whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Forgive me, I clicked the link instead of booting up my own Zoom account. And so my name, I usually have MeHAF on there and a little bit more information, but Frank Martinez Nochito, and it's a pleasure to speak with you all, and you can see some familiar faces here. And so Mary and I have had the opportunity to chat and to get a sense of what might be helpful at this juncture of what you're undertaking. And I thought, for starters, maybe just a little bit of context in terms of what I'm going to talk about. And Mary, I was able to pull together they're a little dodgy, but slides that might be helpful for the conversation in terms of, just looking at some of this information that I'll share. And there's a good bit to talk about. So I'm going to take this at, a fairly high level and maybe dip into some detail here and there, but I've shared some information with Mary and happy to offer additional support where it's helpful. But as I said, I know some of the organizations here, some of the folks here, but just to say a brief word. So MeHAF, the Maine Health Access Foundation, we are one of the largest health-focused foundations in Maine. And so, and we are a health conversion foundation that focuses on primarily access to healthcare, broadly defined, but access and really improving overall health equity for all Mainers. And then we have some focus on priority populations. And so, but just to underscore what you all are doing today is very exciting, especially for us. Undertaking with this process, I am the staff kind of lead on our behavioral health work, and so and we work also across other foundations, part of an affinity group of substance use disorders funders that really work towards getting resources to where they need to go to support a lot of this work. We know Gordon well, know the work that he does well, and so what you're going to be doing here is really a big deal in terms of what this is going to do for all the work that's happening and seeing it advance, seeing it get bolstered in places and maybe move forward. And so just to say thank you for all that you're doing and all that you're about to do with this grant process. So Mary, do you think you could share your screen with me? Would that be okay? Could I project slides or no?
Yes, you should be able to. Haley, if you can give him permission to do so, that would be great. And when Frank and I chatted about coming to the committee to present, we chatted about having a 25, 30-minute sort of overview, and then we'll save questions from the committee until after Frank has a chance to present. And I will acknowledge you said you have to hop off by 4, so we'll be cognizant of that time.
Great. All right, let me see. Can I share? All right, can you see my screen? There we go.
Yes, we can.
All right, so let me see. One second. This. There. All right. So just put together through some slides together just to talk about the grant making process that MeHap is currently using and kind of what we've evolved to so far as a process that is, really both encapsulates all of our values and what we're trying to do in terms of trying to support organizations that we work with, acknowledging that we can't meet our mission without our organizational partners continuing to do their great work. And so we try to do what we can to create as simple and as supportive a process for accessing grant funds so that folks can spend all of their valuable time actually doing the work that they do. And so our processes have really moved towards trying to be as equitable as possible and also simple as possible. And you'll see that we have kind of evolved to a point where we're now using this similar approach with all of our competitive grant making. And so I'll be talking about from the kind of, as an example, our community responsive grants program, which we actually just launched the RFP yesterday. So for some of you organizations on this call, you'll definitely want to take a look at that. But that process is going on between now and through October of this year. And so again, CRG is our community responsive grants process, LOI, letter of inquiry. And so MeHap has a 2-stage application process, again, that we've kind of evolved to. And so folks go through the LOI process, and then we select a group of applications that we invite for full proposals. And so all of this is both planned in advance and tied into the request for proposals, or RFP, that is developed over the course of the previous year. And this particular program is one of 2 sister responsive grant programs that we're currently operating on an annual basis, but on 5-month kind of, 5-month time frames, but that are essentially one process is winding down and the other is booting up. And so we've been doing this for the past 5 years. And one of the reasons why we've done that is because a lot of what we've heard back from our organizational partners has been around the importance of dependable, knowing when grant processes are going to be happening, and so that they can start to build that into their own schedules. We spend a lot of time around applicant communications in addition to the RFP. This year we offer, we also have 2 guidance documents, one that kind of expands upon the RFP itself. The other talks about our grants management system and kind of the nuts and bolts of actually applying for this grant. And so all of that is done online. And so those 2 guidance videos are posted on our website, along with a list of frequently asked questions that support and really probably anticipate most questions that folks have, not only about the LOI process, but also the full proposal. In terms of application, so folks, it's pretty basic. We boiled this down as much as we could so that way we would, again, make it as light a lift for our organizational partners and applicants, so that way they are not spending any more time than they need to. We also offer folks, I'll be holding office hours next week so that folks can also have the opportunity to engage with us, ask questions, maybe talk about a little bit about their concept that they're hoping to propose. But also they can schedule separate calls with me if they want, because we found that the more we can engage with folks in advance of their application, then the better chance they have of understanding whether this particular program, grant program, is aligned well with their project, because we don't want folks spinning their wheels unnecessarily. So folks simply, they fill out, it's probably a healthy list, but like of basic information, some questions about their project, descriptors, and then there is a single kind of prompt asking them to describe their project and how it aligns with our program criteria. So for us, this is at the heart of our entire process, and determining how well aligned a project is or a concept with our program. And as we say to folks all the time, I don't think we've ever come across a bad application or concept project. It's really just whether it's aligned with this particular program. And so there's 5 criteria. Again, we tie that into our entire process, including how we score applications, which I'll review briefly in a moment. So we have developed, in addition, so it's the questions, the descriptions of the project, that prompt that they fill out, and then they just send us also a very brief couple of sentences, a budget description. Like, what are they intending to use the funds for? They submit that, and then we receive all of that information to our grants management system, which we then compile the data, which I'll talk also in a moment about. So in terms of the rating scale, we use the same rating scale for the LOI process and for the full proposals. We have evolved from, I've been with the foundation, I'm in my 6th year. When I started, we were at the tail end of having the most complicated, lengthy rubric and scaling. I forget if it was up to 80 points or something. Like, it just was so cumbersome to work with. And we found that over time that we've come to this point where we've realized that you can actually boil that down. And in some ways, we're getting even better results in terms of our grant making than we had before, as well as being a lighter lift for both our applicants and for staff. So I'll come back to that rating scale on the next slide. We have a staff review and kind of process that happens before we, enter into a reviewer meeting after the applications are received, and it's all kind of closed for receiving additional applications. And so, but for each of the LOIs that we receive, we assign 3 reviewers. And so at the LOI stage, it's all staff. And so we have a group of about 6 to 7 staff that review applications. And then at the full proposal stage, we have the same group of staff, but we also invite 12, around like 10 to 12 external reviewers from a group of external partners and organizations, some even other funders that actually help to provide perspective on our process. One of the things that we've moved towards over the past 10 years has been trying to shift the power dynamics within philanthropy and specifically our own grant making. And so at the LOI phase, staff are making decisions about the applications that are invited, but at the full proposal stage, while staff still review the applications, the full proposals, it is the 12 external reviewers that make the recommendations for like which ones are going to move forward for funding. And so that is, so that we remove that power, or kind of shift the power differential there. And almost always we take those recommendations and we bring them to our own program and grants committee, who make the decision about which projects get funded. And so, but that actually, that change has made a remarkable difference with our grant making. We have Through our grants management system, we are able to manipulate a lot of the data that we receive, so we can use it in a lot of different ways. It actually serves a number of purposes, and again, I have a separate slide to talk a little bit about that. But we take the data that we have gotten through all of the applications at the LOI phase, and we kind of package it up for the staff so that way we can boil some of the information down. And I'm going to project a spreadsheet that we use, or that we've developed, that we found to be very helpful in terms of being able to manage whatever assignments reviewers get. We have, at both stages of the grant making process, we have a conflict of interest process where both staff confirm whether they have any conflicts with the organizations that are applying for a grant this year, so that when we're making assignments, reviewer assignments, that we can take that into account. We do the same thing with our external reviewers, that they also look at the list of applicants and let us know if there's any conflicts of interest. And all that does is, for us, it determines who is able to vote in on applications and not. Because we've through our processes have understood that we are able actually to we want to involve folks as far into the process as possible, because we value their perspective. And so we're trying not to exclude folks from conversation or discussion that could be helpful. And so we share whatever conflicts of interest that are known, and folks share that during our reviewer meetings, and we have conversation, and then they just simply step back when it comes time to voting. And then in terms of the notifications for applicants, we notify them at each step of the process, those that were both selected, and then those that were also were not selected. And we actually offer folks the opportunity to schedule a debrief call if they were not selected, if they want to get feedback on their application. Okay, so and again, this is primarily around the LOI process, but as you probably gathered, there's kind of overlap with some of the full proposals process as well. All right, so I was talking about the rating scale. And so for each of the two stages of the grant making process, LOI and full proposal, we use this very simple scale to determine how closely a particular project aligns with the program. And so it's 1 through 4, and it's, it doesn't align with the criteria, it does so minimally, it somewhat aligns, or it strongly aligns. And again, we used to have, I forget how many numbers, and like it was pretty cumbersome. But in the end, again, we've realized that over time, as we've gotten narrower and narrower, this seems to work pretty well. And so we've been really grateful for the opportunity to do that. And so we have also over time, both within our own grant making and also in working with other foundations, both within the state of Maine and also nationally, come to learn a number of best practices, or what we would consider. And here, this is not a comprehensive list, but alongside it's, these are some of the bigger things I think that have become important to us. But one is that the grant process that we develop, that we do all of that planning in advance of releasing our RFPs, so that way both the staff, the organization, anybody involved in our process, but also for applicants, that they're clear when they begin the process, kind of what that'll look like. We have, as I mentioned, a number of different ways that we communicate to applicants. We found the feedback we've gotten from folks is that they greatly appreciate, the thought and the time we take in terms of relaying information, but really work to simplify the way that we communicate information in the RFP, in kind of every piece of the grant making process, so that way it's as accessible for folks as possible. One of the things we do with all of our competitive programs is that we have a grant cap in terms of the amount of funding that folks can expect that they can apply up to. In some cases, folks provide a range. They could say, or they don't provide a cap per se, but they say you can expect, we'll be awarding grants between this amount and this amount. And so at least there's some latitude for the grant maker, but the applicants have a sense in terms of, what to expect in terms of, what would be possible and how to, because that's going to determine how they, right size their proposal, right? So it's like if it's unlimited, then that may lead folks to apply for larger amounts and scale up their project accordingly. External reviewers, again, we found that as we have over the last several years, especially brought in external partners to support us in this process, we found that it has been extremely rich and we've gotten tremendous results in terms of our the projects that have been supported. And we continue to learn so much from our external partners. And so we also have developed kind of a compensation kind of table for really anyone we're engaging, but especially for reviewers, but also when we engage organizational partners, just in conversations about, in some cases, how we, even the review of our RFP, we have offered folks compensation for their time to do that. So just in terms of valuing people's time, we found that to be definitely a best practice. Minimal reporting. And so, over time, we've realized, we've started asking more and more questions. I think COVID prompted a lot of this, where we realized, like, why do we do X? Why do we ask for, a budget form, or a financial report, this report, that report? It's like, and then we realized that we could actually scale some of that back, and that we can then, again, ensure that folks have the time that they truly need to be able to do the work that their, that their project is supposed to be, addressing. And so, and then the last bit is around the grants management system. In terms of process, especially large amounts of applications, I think just about all, all funders that we work with have some type of system that they're using. If they are certainly at the scale that we are in terms of grants, but smaller foundations do it, I think, more manually. But in general, there's some great advantages to having a system dedicated just to that, especially if you are foreseeing that you'll be doing grant making for a period of time. In the case of the council, I could think too, that would lend also a continuity in terms of the work, as even current members are cycling off and so forth. If that changes at all, you can ensure that there's, consistency across the way that you're doing your grant making, with room for, changes, of course, but at least that system would be able to capture all of that info, and you can utilize it as needed. So I just included a couple slides. I'll share these with Mary, and she can make them available to the group. But this is just, so Founded, this isn't a plug for Founded. This is just the grants management system that we use and have been using, I think, for the past now 6, maybe 7 years. And so we used to use a different system for almost, I guess, just about 16 years, no, more than that, 17 years-ish. And then we migrated our system over to Founded. And so, but there's 2 slides here. It just gives you a sense in terms of like the benefits of having a system that can help with a process, so that you're doing less kind of quote unquote manually, and you have something that can process all this information, and you can develop, spit out reports or different types of tables, things that would help you in your grant making. And so I just thought I'd include those here and here. And so, and again, this can benefit both from the applicant's kind of experience, but also for the staff or the individuals involved in the actual grant making, and even having external folks involved in your process. Everybody can be plugging into this same system and, essentially either inputting information or being able to get information from it as well. I did include this example, but maybe I'll come back to it. But this is just in terms of processes, just a recent example. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Maine Council on Aging, but they had received a grant. I think it may have even been through Hannaford, but they have been doing, it's kind of like a mini grant kind of opportunity where the program is Connection, Health, and Equity Through Food, or CHEF, which is kind of cute. And so the program provides funding to older adults, but in terms of being able to create equitable access to food, but also to connecting to others in their community. And so these were small grants. This is an example of, an organization that provided a range of awards, but their average award was about $7,000. They'd received 162 applications. That's a lot. That's a lot of applications. And they ended up funding 50. And I think this may be the first of potentially multiple rounds. But this might be helpful to follow up as another approach. But as you're thinking about what you want to be able to do here, I thought that it could be just one very quick example and just something I had heard about recently. But there obviously are other funders that do their work slightly differently than we do. But I'd say that that this is, that everybody has a process, obviously, that is tailored to their specific needs. And so I have my contact info there. Mary, how are we doing on time?
We've got a couple more minutes. If you want to share, I think if we can wrap up around 3:40, that will give us time to ask some questions.
Okay, great. So I wanted to just briefly show you, this is kind of a template that we use for our responsive grant programs. And this is something to assist our reviewers. And so here, there's multiple tabs. This first one is what we send out to our reviewers when we assign the LOIs, and that we'll be doing this next month. And so, and I just included some of the details here, in columns C through F, so that so that's like real data. I removed like all the identifying information, but I wanted to be able to illustrate, part of what we do is, we have a budget for this year. We don't have any limit in terms of the number of LOIs we receive. We never know how many we'll get. We actually take, we make guesses among the staff, but ultimately we never know until they come in at the deadline. And so, but what I want to show you is that the total requests last year were almost $2.3 million, and our budget was probably around $500,000. And so part of what we had to do in determining like how many people can we invite, we kind of have this fairly simple way of approaching this, where we're gonna look in terms of what we could potentially fund, and we don't want to invite more applicants. We want to limit the number of applicants we invite, so that way we're being realistic in terms of what we could fund. And so last year we had again, I think 32 total LOI applications. We ended up inviting about 20 because we were expecting that we could fund about 10. So 8 to 10. So we were trying to scale it down so that we weren't inviting more than double of what we thought that we could fund, assuming that also aligned with in terms of how applications were scored in terms of alignment. Again, we don't want folks to go doing any more work than they need to. So if we know that there's certain projects that would not be funded likely, then we wouldn't want to invite them. But this at least gives you something that you could use as a tool, that you can both see the information We list the reviewers here. Again, each of the applications had 3. Last year, I reviewed 32. That's a lot. And that was within about a 3-week period. And so, and then here is just our goal areas, one of the 5 criteria. And so this was just something we included so that folks could get a sense of where each of the applications they were reviewing, kind of how they aligned with our goals. And then we also have a scoring template that takes some of that same information, but it also lays out our criteria, all but that last one that I just mentioned of our goal areas. And so for each of the criteria, you can vote a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. There's a place for comments. This might be something with a manual process that you might want to consider, because something that could capture that information and that you could at least have somebody pulling together, because you'll want to be able to capture some of this stuff electronically, because you'll find that there's a lot of uses for it down the road. And so again, this like tallies up the score. This again is the 5th criteria, and then just checking whether the preliminary budget, and then in the end we have a recommendation also 1 to 4, and it's either definitely not, probably not, possibly, or this is my top choice. And so again, simplifying things and making it reasonable for the reviewers as well. And so then when we, in advance of a reviewer meeting that is scheduled about a month after we receive like the deadline for the applications, we share back all the compiled data that we feel is important for folks to understand before the meeting. And so that includes this template that has a compilation of criteria for each of the applications. And then we sort them in terms of average recommendation, the 1 to 4, and then the average score is anywhere from 1 to 16, which is the combination of all 4 of the criteria, 4 points maximum each. And so, but you can then have the ability to even, potentially approve some off the top because they score so high, and then also eliminate some towards the bottom if they fall below a certain level. And so you could see here that some of these, that was the case. And so then we also offer it average score versus recommendation. And then this you can look at after. Again, I shared it with Mary, but this was what it actually looked like, again, with all the applicant information removed. But it also helped us see where we were geographically, and so that we can ensure that we were getting a diversity of applications. But we, in fact, approved a number of projects. That was part of what we proposed at the beginning of our reviewer meeting. And then we eliminated a bunch immediately as well. And so the idea was that then you had a manageable amount that maybe you discuss as a group or you look at closer. And so this just gives you a little bit of what that process is. And so there's some other information I'll share with Mary. I know that is a big old dump of info, and I appreciate your patience. And I didn't know if folks had questions, and I'll stop sharing the screen. Bruce.
I'm particularly first of all, thank you, Frank. I'm particularly interested in the external reviewers process. We've talked about that as a council and wondered what that looks like and what kind of role they play, and what kind of weight is given to the external reviewers. It sounded like it was valuable, and I just want to know how you got that to work.
Yeah. So we've actually, in the last couple of years, we've developed kind of a survey of what what's important for us to have in terms of assembling a reviewer team. And so we now have a reviewer pool of folks that we periodically through the year will invite folks to, if they're interested, to essentially complete the survey. And then we compile all that information in a table so that we can see, depending on the process, we may go to that list and then select a bunch of folks and contact them to see if they're willing to participate in the process. But we have found that that has been a time saver. And so because now we have this list of about 60 individuals, and you're all invited to apply, because we're always looking for reviewers. But we can look at what each of those individuals are bringing in terms of their work and life experience and their perspectives so that we can have diverse reviewer teams as part of our processes. And so in terms of weight, Bruce, those recommendations almost always are the ones that are approved. And so like whatever, so there is, we have, I mentioned the LOI reviewer meeting, but we also have a similar full proposal meeting, and it's about usually almost a full day. And we try to make a similar proposal at the LOI stage, where we accept some that are ranked really high or rated high, and those that are scored lower, so that that way we can zero in and have discussion on the proposals that need the most time. And so, but I can't emphasize enough like how important that kind of dimension of our reviewer process is, how important that has been. And because, and it's also a little bit of a, I'm glad I didn't have to make that decision. You know what I mean? Because these projects are so amazing and sometimes they're so closely aligned. You know, there's some tough decisions that need to be made because, you have a budget. And so does that get at what you were looking at?
Yeah, thank you. I guess a quick follow-up is the external reviewers are using the same scoring methods that your team is using?
Absolutely, absolutely. Scoring the same exact way. The other thing I didn't mention, Bruce, so thank you, is that we provide a separate training just for the reviewers. And so that we walk through some folks, there's a range of experience reviewing grants, and we're most interested in those. It's great if they have some experience. We're more interested in the perspective they're bringing. And so we are willing to work with folks, build their capacities.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gordon, did you have a question?
I did, Frank. Did you, in response to Bruce's question, did you talk about compensating the external reviewers?
No, I think I mentioned in the beginning, but we do compensate folks for their time, and that's part of what we communicate to folks when we reach out to them initially to say, here's the time frame. Does this work for you? And then we say, we're going to provide you with this, hourly compensation, so that way, again, we can demonstrate we value their experience, we value their time, and it also is a little bit of the commitment involved too. You know what I mean? So that folks know they're going to be paid for their time. We also have folks sign an agreement, like it's essentially a reviewer agreement, we call it, but it includes some specifics around confidentiality, the importance of, making sure that they understand what's expected, and then also the piece around conflict of interest. So that's all rolled up in that agreement. And so we found that to be pretty effective. And then the last thing I'd say with reviewers, especially training, is we're doing more around bias. And so like making sure that folks understand, how bias plays into their decisions. And we want to make sure that that's at the forefront of them.
Can I ask one follow-up, Joe? Thank you for that, Frank. That's just what I was interested in. It wasn't clear to me in the process whether the scoring by the external reviewers and your 3 internal members, does that just create a recommendation that goes to your full board, or is the decision actually made at the lower level?
So it's a good question. So at the reviewer meeting, the final, like we end that meeting with a slate of recommended projects. We take that to package it up, take it to our program and grants committee, a subcommittee of our board. they actually, we walk through them all, they review everything, they ask questions, we discuss them, and then they either accept or they don't the slate of grants or projects, and then that's advanced to our board, which technically makes the final decision, but they usually go with the decision of the committee. And so, but the idea again is to, like a lot of the folks, the external reviewers we bring in usually have experience that are related to, in this case, our 4 goal areas. And so, and or from diverse communities, we have folks that, do work or have experience around behavioral health, because that's a big focus of some of our grants. And so, yeah, so all of that is kind of activated.
Thanks.
Other questions? Courtney.
Courtney.
I think this is a question for maybe Ella, Haley / AG team. Are we able to, if we were to do that, if we were to bring on outside scorers, are we able to compensate them? I think there's a clause in our MOU or the piece of legislation, I don't know which one, that doesn't allow for compensation. Could somebody look that up?
It doesn't allow for the council members to receive compensation. Mary is a contractor through the state. There could be a process by which you contract with external reviewers. I don't think the council right now has an ability to hire their own external reviewers, but they could be contracted with and compensated through a contract.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions of folks have? Mary, can I just share a couple of closing thoughts?
Yes, please. And I actually have one last question for you. And I think we talked about this briefly when you and I had met, but I'm hoping you can speak a little bit more to that last scoring metric that you spoke about, the recommendation score. Could you describe a little bit more, the purpose of that score and how it's included in the evaluation?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And so what we found is that by scoring the applications, whether at the LOI phase or the full proposal, it gives us a way of understanding a couple of different things. One, in terms of it's a number that's based off of the criteria, so you naturally see a separating of the applications, and in some cases it's tighter, and others it's pretty clear when some just they don't align, and others that just are off the charts, just kind of the ideal project. And so but in terms of the so we have the scoring, which again can be as high as 16, and then the recommendation 1 to 4. All that does is it helps to separate some of those things, but it also shows even alignment or if there are diverging opinions among reviewers. And so with a group of 3 at the LOI stage, I didn't mention, but at the full proposal, it's 5 reviewers. So we have 2 staff and 3 external reviewers. And so that gives us a chance. So you have more opinions at the full proposal or input, but those numbers, they serve a purpose as you're going through and trying to manage this larger process, because you can only discuss so many proposals. And so we try to narrow the number that we actually have to talk about. And then we even assign reviewers as lead kind of on a discussion so that they could, give a summary of what the project's about, because the reviewers haven't read all of the applications. And then that enables them to have a pretty good idea. And then we ask each of the reviewers to kind of weigh in, especially the diverging opinions, because we want to understand that. And we find that as valuable as the numbers are, sometimes those discussions really help, because it sometimes clarifies things, even if folks are operating under, certain assumptions, which come out in the discussion. And so you can eliminate those. And then it's like, oh, okay, if I'm not thinking this, then actually maybe I would have scored this application higher. We also try to work into both phases of the process the opportunity to go back to applicants with questions if we feel like that would make a difference to the decision ultimately. Because we don't want, again, be operating on assumptions. I talked about bias. It's like we all come with our own bias sometimes about even different organizations that we know. And so it's like we want to remove as much of that, if not all of it, as possible, so that that way we can get down to the heart of it, and that is, the proposal itself. Does that answer, Mary?
It does. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just thinking, I was like, just some bits of, things to think about. And I think one of them is, I had mentioned that this is really, truly an amazing opportunity for the state of Maine. And this is a big task before you. You all have full-time jobs. It just so happens for me, this is my full-time job. And so grant making, and so, but I have to say, I couldn't imagine doing my job on top of yours. And so understand that this is the first time you're undertaking something like this. You all need to be, I'd offer as realistic an approach this first time as possible and simple, because you always have the opportunity to assess your process at the end so that you can improve it for the next time. But I don't know anyone, even the most advanced grant makers, that get it right all the time. Like nobody does. And we're doing this every day. And so just be, fair to yourselves, realistic, kind to yourselves in terms of the process and the steps that you take. But know that you're going to have a chance to be able to improve upon what you do this time. And you also need to be realistic, because you don't know how many LOIs you're going to get. You could get 20, you could get 50, you could get 300. Like, you just don't know. And so try to keep it as simple as possible. And then post process, you can explore other foundations models or approaches, other organizations, and then think about what you feel like would work best for the council. And then there's one other thing. But you're going to have to, in the end, make some decisions as much as possible, hard decisions, but as much as possible, try to remain as communicative with the applicants as possible within the way you've structured the process so far. And also so that way, if there's anything, like if you run into a delay or something happens, that you're able to kind of pivot as you need to. But I think the most important thing is keeping as connected to them as possible. And I think I'm just looking at my notes here. But I think that would do it. But just to let you know, we are here to offer guidance and support as we are able to. We can't do this for you, but we can certainly, walk with you as you go through this process. And as I said, there's a lot of fantastic funders, foundations in Maine, and a ton, I think, that could help, you all build a process that you feel good about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Frank. We appreciate you providing that overview. And I know, at least for me, it was really helpful to have you walk us through your evaluation process, really from the beginning stages to also the end, and right before the full proposals are invited. And so thank you for doing that, and also presenting that template for the reviewers. I know we've spoken about having our scores do the initial round of scores individually. And so it was great to see what a template for that could look like and how we could come back together and have discussions from there. So thank you for your time, and I will definitely be in touch with you if there's anything else you can do to support the committee or the council. So we look forward to learning more. So thanks.
Great.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for sharing your slides with Mary. I look forward to seeing those closer
Absolutely.
too, but thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Good luck to you, okay? Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wonderful. All right. So the next presentation we have is from two folks with Barry Dunn, who help oversee Kennebec's ARPA funds. And we're very glad to have them here as well. Similar to MIHAF, they work in the grant, work within the grant management process, but are going to offer a bit of a different perspective for us. So building off of, the evaluation and scoring for the letter of intent, Tim and Zeb, who are here, will talk a little bit more around the grant application in general and some of the considerations for us around next steps. And I shared our timeline with them, as well as a couple other documents that they had a bit more context about where we are right now. But we'll do a similar process where we'll have them share some of their best practices and guidance for us, and then we'll ask questions once they're through. So, Tim and Zeb, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mary. I got to tell you, a hard act to follow, that Frank guy. He went through some great information. I would say I don't disagree with anything he said. So that was a good choice for someone to present to the council. So my name's Tim Cutler, and as Mary mentioned, I'm with Barry Dunn, and Zeb and I are part of the financial management practice within the government assurance practice group at Barry Dunn. And what we focus on primarily is helping clients develop grant programs, well, anywhere from finding grant funding opportunities to applying for the grant funding, but then once the funding is available, helping them either develop grant programs to sub out the award funding to others, or to actually manage internally the processes related to the grant awards. So what we're focusing on today, and we're going to go over, we have a slideshow that we can share as well, is some of the things we are going to talk about. I realize as Frank was talking are very, almost duplicative. So if there are sections where, as I begin to look at a slide or Zeb looks at a slide that we realize Frank did an excellent job, we'll do our best to try to just breeze through that so you don't have to hear it twice. Though, you may be interested and want to read it later for some light reading before bed or something. So Zeb, if you would not mind starting the presentation.
I'm not able to share my screen. Should I send the presentation to someone, or?
I just made you a co-host. You should be able to now.
Thank you so much. 1 second here. Just getting up the right slide deck. Okay.
Fantastic. And while you pull that up, Zeb, I'll just note that it's helpful for us to hear different perspectives, even if it's around the same topic. So we appreciate you walking us through, even if it's similar to what Frank spoke about. I believe that will be really helpful for us, again, as
Perfect.
we move through this process. Thank you.
And I did make a few notes because I know there were questions related to external grant evaluators. So there are a few things that may not be in our presentation, but I thought I would add, our experience with that as well, and we can certainly address that. So I guess we're in one of those things where I'm going to say next slide, Zeb. So quick little history on Barry Dunn. We're Maine based out of Portland, Maine. The firm's been around for 50 years. We do have offices all around the nation. I'm actually a remote employee based right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, but I've been here for 5 years. Prior to that, I'm from Vermont. But we've been working, as I said before, we've worked with mostly with state, local governments, and nonprofits, either in our current roles or our prior roles, to help them either administer or manage grant funding in compliance, as well as to achieve the outcomes they're seeking. Quick background, I guess we can go to the next slide. So I lead the financial management practice. I've been with Barry Dunn 2.5 years. Prior to that, a very quick summary is for 3 years, I ran the North Carolina Biotech Center, which was focused on developing ways to increase the workforce related to biotechnology careers within the state. I also worked for the state of Vermont in the Health and Human Services department for 5 years as a director of operations, managing their grant funding for various programs. And with that, I'll let Zeb give a quick little introduction.
Thank you, Tim. My name is Zeb Latorno. I am a project manager also within our government assurance practice group in the financial management practice. I've been working with Tim throughout the last 5 years, and I've been at Barry Dunn over a little bit over 8 years now, working on grant management and grant program strategy, everything from application writing and development to strategizing how to go after funds, helping state and local entities set up grant programs, and then figuring out the policies, procedures, and processes that they need to put in place to make for effective and efficient grant programs. As Tim said, I've been working with Kennebec County and Androscoggin County on their ARPA grant programs. I'm based down in Portland, Maine, along with several of our other staff. So although we do have a national presence, we also have a large footprint in Maine, and we do love working with local Maine entities. Thank you very much, Tim. I'll pass it back to you.
Perfect. Next slide. So quick little review of what we're going to discuss. The session topics is, our understanding of the funding goals for the council, the grant application evaluation best practices, and evaluating a grant application budget. And so during that process, if at any time you have questions, we have no problem with you stopping and saying, asking for clarification if that's helpful. So with that, we'll go to our first slide. And Zeb, I'm actually going to let you present this section if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So this is just a quick overview section of the 3 pillars that the Maine Recovery Council has identified for disbursement of the funds, in addition to some of the strategic priorities that were outlined. We understand that there are other strategic priorities as well for all 3 of these areas. However, we did find treatment, recovery, support, and harm reduction were the 3 pillars, and they included a variety of strategies for investing the funds, including investing in a continuum of care for substance abuse, providing access to essential resources, investing in support programs. I won't go through all of these because I understand that the Recovery Council is probably well aware of them. However, we did want to highlight those before we go into the overall application evaluation best practices, because we find that a lot of those best practices roll back up into your goals and priorities for how you would like to successfully spend those funds. All right, Tim, back to you.
Perfect. Next slide. So we'll start, as I mentioned, with grant application, best practices. And what we did with this is what we're trying to do is through these slides is present an overview of things we would recommend you include in your grant application as you're developing it. And with the goal being that this is based upon, not only our experience, but overall experience of the federal government, et cetera, how it structures its grant applications to try to minimize, as Frank mentioned, minimize the confusion and the frustration that sometimes applicants feel when submitting grant applications. So within, broken down, like within the program description section, where we always recommend that obviously there be an overview of what the program is and then program information. But what we mean by program information is to include not just, the program, this, how it was funded, et cetera, but to include what the program is really seeking in its goals. And that kind of feeds into the investment priority, where one of the things to consider, I apologize if this has been, discussed and decided, but you will have a pool of money and you have listed 3 pillars of where you would want to spend your funding. Actually, I'm going to stop for a second. Courtney, did you have a question? Oh, okay, sorry, because I
Oh,
see it.
sorry, I'm just like, nope, I'm good, thanks.
No, I all of a sudden I saw a little white hand and I thought, well, I don't want to go way off after I just said they could ask questions at any time. So so the investment priority, and one of the things we recommend to people is, and I think Frank mentioned this, is that whatever the pool of money you're seeking to award is within those pillars. If you have defined, what ones an amount that you think you would, expect to expend on treatment versus, harm, that you delineate that within here and give guidelines so that you can say, $5 million is anticipated to go to this, an average grant award would be X, and we anticipate making 20 awards. And what we tell people is, if you plan to give $5 million and you say an average award would be $400,000, and, well, actually, I'll make the math easier for me. You're going to give $5.2 million and the average award is, 400,000. If you put that in there, you can then obviously say we will award up to 20 grants, even though if you did the straight math, you'd say, well, that's $8 million. So we encourage that because how it helps an applicant, as somebody who has written grants for a long time, is it allows you to understand that it's okay not to ask for the maximum amount because you're not looking to. So I don't want to I know in my consulting over the years, I've been writing grants or have, as a contract grant writer for over 25 years. And oftentimes when people see an amount of the award, they try to build their program to be the amount that the award is listed, but they do so almost as the detriment of when they're then getting into their narrative. They can't really explain how they would do all those services because they're trying to sell you services that are not their real focus. So why we say to have that range in there is it's one of our recommendations that we've seen on successful programs is providing that kind of information of your priority and, the investment priority as well as the funding amounts helps the people who are writing it to understand that they can be responsive with what they want to do. As somebody, as I said, I worked with many grant entities that were looking to apply for grants, and they oftentimes would come up with plans that were very ambitious. And ambition is not a negative thing. However, it's like it's better to have them stay within their range. So we encourage you to find ways within your program description to let them understand that they should apply and plan to do things they feel comfortable, as opposed to try to do everything that you might list as a priority or a desired outcome. Then again, obviously, and within the next section, what these slides actually, I guess I should say, and I maybe already said it, but what these slides are meant to be is kind of the format that we would recommend of how you put the information into any application you create. So again, there's award information that you provide related to the 3 pillars, again, with the total funding available, the type of funding instrument used in the period of performance. So if you're planning that these programs are going to, be done in 2 years, making that quite clear that it's, as of the start, when they would have to be done, etc. Next slide, Zeb. Eligibility information, you're going to have pre-screened the individuals through your letter of intent. However, what we mean by this in your particular case is if you are looking for any kind of eligibility of someone who is proposing treatment, there may be a certain thing that you have a newer entity that is providing treatment, but you are seeking to, work with entities that have been providing treatment for a minimum of 3 years or what. Making sure any kind of preconceived, or not preconceived, that's a bad word to say, pre-planned or desired qualifications are clearly defined for individuals so that as they're writing their application, they can address those, sufficiently. especially any definitions related to your viewpoint on subrecipients or co-applicants or contractors, as well as, I don't know that you plan to, but if there is any kind of cost sharing or matching stipulations that you would like to see. And then, the application submission information, that's rather self-explanatory, but, some of the things under number 2 that often get missed when applications are being developed are those full 4 bullet points of how, yes, you'll have where to submit, but the means to verify a submission. If you're a smaller entity and you're putting it in and you send an email, it's always more comforting to receive something back that says, yes, we received your thing, and here's, your application, here's the next step. We recommend that if you're using an online system that's being filled, that you offer alternative submissions or decide if you want to offer alternatives for entities that may have difficulty submitting an online application, as well as your overall project design and substance, alternate ways that you can make the application available and accessible to, all individuals. And with that, we can go to the next slide. And Zeb, if you'd like, I certainly can continue, but I'm sure the group would not mind hearing from you as well.
Sure. And just to jump in about the eligibility information, this is a great field that can be updated throughout the life cycle of the grant program. For example, I'm not saying it could happen, but if you received an overwhelming amount of applications in treatment and recovery support, but no applications in harm reduction, or you did not receive enough applications in a certain area such as Northern Maine, the eligibility information section can be updated throughout the grant program, and you can tailor it to various initiatives to if you feel that you're not getting enough projects under one pillar or in one category. So it's a way to tailor your focus as the grant program evolves and you feel that there may not be areas that the program is making progress in that you would like to see progress. So next slide, the application and submission information. So this is actually a continuation from the previous application and submission information section, but it adds on to the previous slide with the project design and substance section. We recommend including a few different items within the project design and substance section. The first is your project description and overview, which would include items like your executive summary, your vision, your mission, your goals, and your roles. For example, how are you positioned to support, to perform and lead the project work? What are the program goals? Can you describe the roles that your organization currently plays or individuals within your organization? Second, ecosystem, resources, and assets. This includes the project's both geographic location and region, in addition to the primary service area, communities, and regions that are served. We think it's very important to include this within the application information because you may have projects who have a location or primary region, say Southern Maine. However, they could also be servicing areas across the state. I did see mobile units was one strategy within the 3 pillars for under harm reduction. This is another area where you might have mobile units that serve certain communities or regions and not others. However, it's really difficult as an evaluator to understand what region is being served if you don't have as much information as possible within the application. So it's an area that it seems redundant, but we recommend as much specificity as possible here. Third, your proposed solution. This can include problems and solutions, affected groups, and your region opportunity alignment. So is this an area or a region that is underserved in regard to the service that the nonprofit or organization would be providing? So is there synergy within the region because there is there is a lack of those services there, or there additionally, there could also be just a structure within the region already that helps support the program. So understanding how that solution fits into the bigger picture. Fourth, partnerships. Any former, current, or future partnerships with any public or private entities, and just understanding what those entities are, whether they're at the state, regional, or local level, and then in a description of the roles and responsibilities each of those collaborators might play within the project. We've found that things can often change a lot between when an organization submits a grant application and when they're awarded funding, the grant agreement's executed, and the project starts. Understanding all of the partnerships involved on these grant projects, in addition to the roles and the responsibilities played by each of those collaborators, will help you if things fall apart and new organizations need to get involved with the project, or need to be subbed in for certain aspects. Outcomes. So including your anticipated goals, what outputs you plan to measure to assess those goals and demonstrate progress. We recommend having goals that are SMART, which means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We found that including specific measurable objectives allows you to, as the grantor, do a much better assessment of the progress the entity has made in comparison to what they've promised you. And the application should indicate why and how these outcomes were selected. They should include evidence that suggests these outcomes are appropriate. And furthermore, they should include a baseline of where the community or where the population that will be receiving the services is currently at. Are we already at 90%, or are we at 10%? What is progress going to look like in regards to that baseline? Program sustainability and providing a sustainability plan, including any anticipated challenges or barriers. For example, if you are creating new community clinics to provide services, how are those clinics going to function or operate beyond these funds? How are they going to continue to be sustainable after the 18 years of the program are over? What's the vision for the program after that point of time? And lastly, you should include a defined scope of work that documents and outlines all the activities that will be conducted under the program. And that should include a timeline to support the implementation of the project. The scope of work and that timeline, it should aggregate directly up to the project budget and the budget narrative. It should also include work that's performed by any subrecipients, co-applicants, or other collaborators to the project. And lastly, it should be realistic and achievable when you can compare that scope of work to the budget and the budget narrative.
And I'll just one before you go. And one thing with the scope of work that I have found and I recommend to clients is when asking for the scope of work, because of course all these are the questions you are asking your applicants to submit to, is, you know, my recommendation is that you make the scope of work be a one-page document. And the reason being for this is, as you are, there's two general reasons for it. The first one being it limits the demand that the applicant will feel as they're feeling, oh, I need to explain everything I'm going to do to great minutia, which can be a very time-consuming process. But it also, what it's going to provide you is it's going to provide you a way to do reporting to other entities of what your projects are in a succinct manner and who is involved. I think one of the greatest challenges I've found working with a lot of nonprofits is with funders who have given money to, you know, nonprofits, is when they try to do their report, and they say, this is what we've accomplished, having a succinct description of what the program is a challenge for you to provide. Whereas if you've had them do this scope, one, it will help you in your reporting upwards, but it also helps you in conversations with your partners, in that it gives you a means by which you can say to them, okay, so these, in this 1-page document, let's go over it. Where are you at with these things? Did you do them? Are you still planning to do them? So it provides a means for later on, not only from potentially a reporting standpoint, but also just from a conversational standpoint, to be able to talk with them about their program and what they had planned to do versus where they are, and then, if necessary, make adjustments. So sorry, Zeb, didn't mean to interrupt, but now I'll put it
No,
back.
thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. And on this last item, that application review information, apologies for the criteria here. I had issues with the table before the call, but we also recommend including within the application your summary of criteria that the applicants will be evaluated against. You should be reviewing and finalizing that summary of criteria right now so that you can provide it within the application, because we've found that it's best to be transparent, both with the public as well as potential grantees, on what they will be evaluated against. We've found that giving transparency and providing insight into how you are thinking about this process provides applicants with more feedback up front. So when projects are ultimately selected, the applicants feel that the process is at least transparent and fair, in that they understand what they would be evaluated against before they're even submitting those applications. And Tim, anything to add on that?
I will say, full disclosure, as you look at this, if you wonder about these percentages, I think this was, to Zeb's point, this was for a different proposal, and we somehow missed that we should have made it relevant. So we're not telling you that you should be asking people the likelihood of their growing innovation economies under this funding. This was just coincidentally, we apologize for the error. We missed this criteria that we hadn't updated the language. So as you're looking at this slideshow, this is more or less, think of it as an example of providing those percentages, because again, as someone, who's written a lot of grants, it's helpful to know that. And it also should tie directly into your evaluation sheet and scoring sheet that you come up to. Is if, the proposed solution and implementation is 30%, then you would anticipate that they will spend more time explaining that in a clearer degree than they might on the continued effects, in using this as an example. So this is a useful tool for you, but it's also a useful tool for your applicants, because they can see the areas that you're looking for them to expand upon at a greater amount. And I'm gonna start on this and say there's several slides on this, and what we tried to do is I think the overall, before we get into the individual slides, but what we tried to do is oftentimes it's the budget from our experience, and many of you have probably worked and run, I apologize, I'm not sure of all your backgrounds, but I'll say I'm sure you're very familiar with funding and the importance of budgeting and meeting the expectations of funders if you've received other grants. And so to help from a standpoint of the council and whomever is working with you to evaluate proposals, the grant application budget, from my experience, one of the things I've done is, for over 5 years, I've served as a federal grant evaluator. I've volunteered and have reviewed grants for Health and Human Services and many other federal agencies. And one of the things, this kind of goes back to something that Frank had mentioned initially, is that having multiple evaluators with different backgrounds is very helpful. And so when I think the question was asked or a couple questions were related to external evaluators, one of the reasons I served for many years is my background was not usually actually programmatically focused, though I could understand the concept, but I had a financial background. So when it came to the budgets, I was able to look at budgets and say, well, does that expense, seem reasonable and, and justifiable, not from I would think that's only $1,000, but they want 1,500, but to look at it because it helps in the development of deciding what is the best use and return on investment that you can get from your investment in these programs. So as we go through this, there's a lot of slides. I would encourage you to read them afterwards, as you're preparing your grant application. If you take the time to look at what we're putting in there, because the grant budget within your application and the narrative that we recommend that you require your applicants to provide actually has a very big outcome ultimately on the success of the program, but oftentimes it's not, as focused on during the review process as it potentially should be. So with that, Zeb, we'll go to the next slide. And I'll go ahead and start, Zeb. So basically the two components of an application that you're going to include is obviously the budget and the budget narrative. And one of the things, as we say here, step-by-step instructions, because a lot of entities, it has been our experience that a lot of entities, though they work on budgets, developing a budget for a proposed activity is a daunting task for a lot of entities. And as a result, we strongly encourage, if you have any specific expectations or guidance that you can provide, that you do it via step-by-step instructions within your application that you're developing. Next slide, Zeb. And then the other recommendation we make is these are the categories. If any of you have ever applied for federal funding, you'll recognize these as these are the 10 categories that the federal government breaks down. You can provide within the narrative more, the request for a budget narrative, more detail. But what we have found is if you, and there may be some, for example, you may not intend to be funding any construction projects. So feel free to take out ones you don't want to fund. But if you stick within these three main headers, what the federal government has found, and we have, we can certainly attest is true, is most people can put their expenditures within one of these categories quite easily. And when you get into a greater level of detail, it often creates confusion with the people filling out the application. So we encourage you to keep it at this high of a level as much as possible. And the same again with the budget narrative, as we've mentioned here. Requesting the budget narrative is good for both you as well as the applicant, because it allows them to think through the process of, if they're saying they need 5 staff members, they're defining for you what those 5 staff members are doing, and the percentage of time they're spending, etc. So you can not only as a reviewer or during the review process determine whether you believe that, it's feasible they can accomplish what they have stated they're going to do with the resources they have, but also so in case after you make a decision regarding funding, it's quite common that, again, as any of you have worked with federal grants, that there is a negotiation of the actual total award amount after the decision to award has been made. So the following slides, which I will gladly let Zeb take the lead on, is basically questions that we've come up with, through, our experience and research of how to answer these questions when you're developing a budget narrative and what you may want to request of your applicants. So Zeb.
Thanks, Tim.
Sorry, Zeb, if you don't mind if I just jump in. So just so you all know, the Program and Grants Committee has discuss the budget narrative, but we also have a finance committee who's the one actually finalizing that. So this is great that it's in a PowerPoint and we can present it, we can share it with them and then present it at our full council meeting. But we just wanted to let you know that now. So if you can keep it sort of big picture, that would be great. And also if you can touch upon, again, from the letter of intent to the grant application, if there's any specific considerations within that time period, that would be helpful for this committee. That
Perfect.
would be appreciated.
Thanks, Mary. I was going to suggest the same thing, just in looking at the time and considering we'll want time for question and answers. I'll just provide a really high level overview. We're suggesting that applicants should be asked to answer the who, what, when, where, and why, and how for the project. So the who is just the people who will carry out the work. The what being the tangible items needed to carry out the proposed project. The when being when the project will happen. So is it going to be over 1 or multiple years? And how could that impact the budget? Where would be location, travel, any utility costs or expenses? Why is the narrative or the budget justification? It's a written version of the budget and justifies all requested expenses. And then the how would explain how the cost for each requested item was determined. So training costs, for example, did you go to the training website and get an estimate, or are you just, putting an estimate together in your head? So that includes all the examples for the grant budget. We can dig into that information more, but just relating it back to the question Mary had posed just a few minutes ago about activities that are important to consider at this point in time for the Maine Recovery Council, from the creation of the LOI through sending out that application and facilitating the applicant submissions. We would strongly recommend just creating your evaluation, your grant application evaluation processes, procedures, your scoring matrices, conducting any trainings, etc. All of that stuff should be done prior to grant evaluators looking at any applications. We feel it's very important to conduct any training to ensure that the reviewers are utilizing a standardized approach for how they're evaluating applicants before they look at any of those applications. Additionally, it's also important to focus on any risk mitigation or compliance brainstorming efforts that may be applicable for later on during the post-award process. For example, starting to define what level of reporting you would like the grantees to be doing, so that information can be included within the grant agreements as part of the templates, so they're aware of that. And then you also need to start to develop processes, policies and procedures for those applicants once they're awarded the funds. And that part of the grant program happens a lot more quickly than our clients usually expect. We go from reviewing and assessing applications, and all of a sudden the money's going out the door, and the grantees are asking, well, what do you need us to comply with in order to spend these funds? So you should start thinking about those reporting metrics, any monitoring that you're doing, any assessments that you need to do for those grantees once they're selected related to risks, so you can define how much monitoring. We typically do risk ratings for grantees once we've selected applicants to award funds. Then we'll send out a questionnaire. Example questions can include things like, what's your previous experience with federal funds or providing the services that you have included in the application? What are the recent have you had any recent audit findings within the last few years? Have you had any key personnel leave? We found that can increase risk for an organization. So it's starting to think about what risk mitigation activities you want to implement, and then conducting a plan for those activities, because you should not just be implementing them after the award. You should be thinking about them now.
Right.
I see some hands raised, so we can pause for questions, if that sounds good to you, Tim.
Sure.
Hey Zeb and Tim, it's nice to see you. Zeb, when you're talking about risk assessment, when you make that assessment of the organization, does that change the level of like communication you'd have with the organization? Like if they're a zero risk, I don't know if anyone's a zero risk, but if there is zero risk, you're having how much communication versus high risk, something, etc. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, feel free to hop in. Tim's been doing this forever, and I've learned from the best.
Now I
But
feel good.
ultimately, he's gonna hear a lot of what he's told
Like
me.
forever.
So Tim has always suggested, along with many of the federal agencies that we work with their grant programs for, that you're scoring the application before you're assessing risk related to the grantee, because we don't want to disincentivize applicants who might be new. For example, if you're a nonprofit that you just started within the last couple of years, or maybe even the last 6 months, you may not have the processes and the policies and procedures to properly manage grant funds, but you may have a fantastic idea and the passion to implement that idea. So rather than evaluating risk as part of that score for the application, we recommend that you conduct a two-part review, where first you review the applications and you select your awardees. And once the awardees are selected, then you evaluate their risk. And at that point, yes, the communication does depend on the risk rating level of that grantee. If they're a low risk organization, we would recommend that you spend less time with the reporting and the monitoring for that organization. You may monitor a lower amount of expenditures, for example, 20% of their expenditures in a given quarter, whereas a high risk awardee, they might have 60% of their expenditures evaluated. And those risk ratings can be dependent on a variety of factors. It can be anything from the organization's previous grant experience to the processes they have in place or their accounting platform, to things like they might have everything together. They're an organization that's been around for 50 years, but the project that they want to do is very advantageous. It's a $10 million project. And so there's just a lot of risk related to the financial aspects of the project. So it might be high risk just for that reason.
And I think Zeb did a fine job. From an application, going back to what he said though, from an application standpoint, everything he said is accurate. Of what we say is risk comes into an application, but it's a different assessment than what you would make, with regards to once you've picked who you're going to give the funding to. Because once, after you've picked your individuals and you've awarded or plan to award the funding, then you have more of an interest of how am I going to help them be a successful individual? Do they have the background, the experience on the financial background stuff? From an application standpoint, the risk becomes, the questions you do want as part of your evaluation is their experience, their partner, who are they partnering with? If they're partnering with someone, how much of the work, are they using a lot of subcontractors? We sometimes run into instances where someone has put in an application and really what they're doing is they're taking more of a lead role of their coordinating other services for multiple organizations. The challenge with that becomes is I'm not saying that you shouldn't fund that type of organization, but that is a greater risk to the overall success because you're not now the individual you're giving funding is for, whether it's through a sub award that they make or a contract, they are not controlling the day-to-day activities. So from an evaluation, I guess what we would say of application, the risk factors you should be looking at are more based upon the ability of that entity to perform the work and to deliver what they're saying they're going to do, as well as how they're going to accomplish it.
Thanks. And Joe, can I just do a quick follow-up, Joe or Mary? Okay. Did y'all help with the counties, like help them through the whole process of putting together their ARPA application, of accepting it,
Right.
scoring it, et cetera, et cetera.
We did. We for several of our clients, the ones in Maine, and we have several others in other states that we did that for. The only service Barry Dunn, which I don't know that you would want us to provide, the only service Barry Dunn can't provide is we can't distribute funds for our clients. But other than that, we, having that, even monitoring invoices coming in, working with them to provide them with insight and guidance, we can do all of that. But yes, the application process of helping to develop the applications that go out and then ultimately scoring them, we created the rubrics as well, and worked with the various entities to do all that and then making the final determination. But ultimately, in the end, we only gave recommendations, which then went to the client themselves to make the final.
Right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any questions? I'd like to think we're very good at our job, but I can't believe we haven't created any questions. But maybe we've said so much, there's nothing to wonder about. But if there aren't any questions, I guess I'll kind of do as Frank did and give some final thoughts on, as you go through the process, touching upon some of the things he touched upon. I know I spoke a little earlier about the use of external evaluators. I totally concur with him, as I think I indicated earlier, that it is a wise process. And the reason being to say this, directly, what we tell our clients is, when the program is being developed by an entity and they're coming up with it, if they're the only ones evaluating it, they're looking at it through their lens of what they were hoping. Frank mentioned bias, and studies have shown that using external evaluators is actually a very good way to get better success, due to the fact that you want individuals who are coming out, reading what you gave the applicant, seeing how the applicant, responded, and then assessing, does it sound logical, reasonable, and, and likely to succeed, versus other, individuals who were involved in the development of the program often look at it through a different lens because of their desire to achieve the goals that were set. So I guess I would just echo his recommendation that I'm not saying a certain magical number or that external evaluators are, should be any particular percentage, but I would agree with him that it is, for these type programs, a good idea to bring someone in who is approaching it from a purely, this is what they were supposed to answer, this is how they answered, do the two match up, and how well do they match up? And then the only thing and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Frank's, his scoring thing, but I would recommend one thing as you're thinking about the qualifications and the activities that you're going to have them address or try to address. Having a very small scoring system of they meet it, they almost meet it, they don't really meet it at all. I don't remember, I apologize, what his 4 criteria is, but it does create, depending when you're doing evaluations, it does create, as a reviewer, a very difficult thing of not having a little wiggle room when you're looking at an evaluation, because if you limit someone to only 4 possibilities, then oftentimes when you're reading, 2 projects can be very similar, but there's just one little thing different. And you don't want to be locked into it's either an all or nothing. So the only thing I would say is, typically when we're advising people on creating, grant applications and then the scoring rubric, is that we do encourage, a scale of, if there's 4 main points or whatever, that it's a scale of 8. 1 through 8, and then so that you give a reviewer the ability to, to differentiate between small factors that, with a small narrow range, you ultimately have to decide, is it material, and you're not really factoring it in. So other than that, those are the only things. Like I said, I think Frank did a great job talking about things. Mary, I don't know if you had anything that we talked about previously that we have forgotten to mention.
No, I think you covered it all and more. So thank you for that. And if
Miles, I see your hand raised, I think.
Hi, I'm Miles. I apologize. I was a little bit late and I haven't been to a few of these last meetings. It's been softball season full effect here the last couple of months, so I'm a little bit behind. But so just a couple of quick questions, and I apologize if you've already answered them. So your organization is going to help create the grant and come up with recommendations
Sorry, you
for
go ahead.
the council.
That is a service we can provide. We're
That's a service.
today, right? We are, I
Okay.
believe, I could be wrong. I believe there's some consideration of an RFP. At this point, we're just offering as a general, because Barry Dunn's in Maine and this is a Maine entity. We're just offering some guidance related to what we would recommend is incorporated into your applications. So it is a service that we, as well as many other firms, can provide those services if it's required.
And
Okay.
Miles, just to provide some context, at the last Program and Grants Committee meeting, the committee requested that we have one or more organizations in Maine come in to provide a bit of training for us around best practices. And so that's how Barry Dunn was identified to come in.
Got it. And do you folks also help or have recommendations for the reporting, the after process for follow-up care, I guess, as you would is
Yeah, our services ultimately from the time, basically we use the phrase cradle to grave. I wish there was a better way to say it, but yes, we can take it from the time that once you award the application, a lot of our clients, for example, if you're starting out with nothing, well, because you're a new, this is a new council and stuff. So what we and again other firms offer is that we can come in and help you develop policies and procedures. We can help with figuring out reporting requirements. That's part of the process that we touched upon very briefly in the application process, is kind of setting an expectation on what reporting will be expected. Ultimately, you'll define that and put it into the grant agreement with who you fund. But if I didn't say it, and now I'm thinking I may have forgotten, as part of your application, thinking that far ahead and saying, what kind of data are you going to need? Like ultimately, I'm guessing your council is going to create some kind of report on the process or the progress that has been made as the years go on, et cetera. So what you're going to want to do is within your application, you're not going to define that because you're not going to know what those parameters specifically are, but setting that expectation, of there will be, if you're applying for this, because again, you want to understand, and you may even want to include as a question, what record systems do you currently use for tracking? That may be an evaluation criteria item that you put in there of how do you track and monitor your project's, outcomes and objectives. But yes, we can help create those documents that will, provide guidance as well as the actual reports themselves.
nice. No, thank you. That was very thorough and I learned a lot. Question for you. When you use the term SMART goals, do you use that in your presentations or was that tailored to addiction and recovery? I like it either way. I just wanted to throw that out there.
It wasn't tailored specifically, we use that phrase even if it's not tailored to addiction programs, but I mean, and that's really, I mean, one of the things I've found over the years, and certainly I realize this isn't a federally funded program, but in dealing with federally funded programs, the federal government themselves are moving towards that because the challenge becomes what you have is you have a lot of entities where they come in and what they'll say is how many people they're going to touch. We're going to do this and we're going to, we're going to have 500 people. We estimate we'll serve 500 people. But what the federal government is finding is you can hit that goal, but did you make a difference? So now, having that defined and saying the SMART goals, so that so it's better defined so that it's not just quantifiable, it's, quantitative of what the difference was, is really the push that the government's making. And we strongly support that and encourage that with nonprofits and other entities as well.
I like it. Thank you very much.
So if there's nothing else, I'm sure you all have other things you were hoping to talk about, not just our evaluation of application thoughts. So it was a pleasure. If they have any follow-up questions, Mary knows how to get in touch with us, and we'd be glad to respond. And Zeb, you look like you have something you want to say.
Yeah, just a note to end on. From a personal perspective and just as a representative of Barry Dunn, I just wanted to say that we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. Tim and I both, as people who live and breathe grants every day, and had both watched the John Oliver episode that had come out recently on the opioid settlements. There's a lot of money that's coming out there to positively impact the local community that's been severely impacted. You guys are all doing an incredible job. We're not seeing enough states moving in this direction, identifying specific pillars to invest in and then following through on investing in those areas. As someone who has friends and family in recovery, it's really exceptional to see the Maine Recovery Council investing so much time into creating an effective, transparent, fair, equitable approach to distributing these funds and to making sure they impact the community. So we at Barry Dunn are always happy to support that. As a Maine company, it's always nice to be able to give back. So thank you for inviting us today. And if there's anything we can do to help you in the future, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you both for your time. We
Thanks.
appreciate it. Yes.
Bye.
I dropped a link to the video he's talking about in the chat. It's definitely worth your 25 minutes. It's hilarious. And
I actually lost my mind when I saw that the Last Week Tonight episode was about the opioid settlements. I was like, that's what I work on.
yeah, it's hilarious and super depressing, but hilarious. So
Okay, do we have time, Mary and Ella, to keep moving right into the LOI? The
I think so. Yeah, we have one last agenda item for everybody, and this is the FAQ for the letter of intent. And Brendan is out of the country right now, and he took a quick look at it and gave some feedback last week. But he said that he's comfortable with publishing it on the website once the committee gives their approval. So hopefully we can post it this week if the discussion goes well. I just want to make sure it's posted sooner rather than later, given the 28th is quickly upon us.
Courtney.
Yeah, Courtney.
I'm sorry, Mary, before we quickly move on to that, I just wanted to put a bow on the other, like the last 2 hours of our lives. Is there a decision that we all need to make, or like something that we need to talk about? Are we going to talk about it at the full council meeting?
Yeah, so I have a document. It's like a 5-page overview of the letter of intent process, and I created that after our last program and grants committee meeting. And I met with both presenters last week, and so I kind of had an idea of what they were going to talk about. And I created that document thinking if we have time today, which we won't, we could review that. So what I'll do is I'll send that out to all of you this week. And my hope is that can provide the basis for a recommendation from the committee for us to then discuss at the full council meeting around the LOI evaluation. So that will be the follow-up, just given our current time constraints, if that is comfortable with everybody.
Okay, sounds good. And I love your LOI FAQ document. I don't.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I also want to mention that, Courtney, as you asked, from this presentation, sort of what next steps look like at the full council meeting on the 20th. The finance committee has already started thinking about how the current roles and responsibilities exist within the council, and then how that can help translate into an eventual RFP for a contractor. So that's a discussion that we anticipate having. If there's anything from this meeting that you all feel would be helpful to bring to the full council, I have my notes, but please feel free to do that. I just want to let you know there will be a discussion around a contract vendor or management support. And I will also ask Pat if we can put an external evaluator sort of selection process or discussion at the very least on the agenda for the 20th as well. So those items will follow up with, and I'll be sure to share the presentations with the full council, because I think the finance committee and others will be interested.
Should we take a vote with the 7 minutes left to post the LOI FAQ on the website, or should we look at it first? I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at it before.
It's probably best practice if we take a look, so I can share it quickly, and then we can take a vote.
I somewhat looked at it. I like, I think that's number 8. Question number 8. I like that.
I don't think we necessarily need a vote to post it either, as long as everyone's happy with it. We post materials from the meetings all the time on the website.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Haley, do you mind if I have screen sharing, please? Great. Okay. So for anyone who hasn't had a chance to look at it, this is the FAQ. And these questions and responses were created from the questions Haley and I have received, sent into the info inbox. I think it's pretty straightforward. So I'll scroll through it. Let me know if you want me to stop or if you have any questions as I do. And that is the FAQ.
Very nice job.
Fantastic. Does the committee approve posting that to the website?
A quick question, Mary. I hadn't had a chance to look at it previously. Is there a question on there about when we would next put out an open call for funding again?
No, there's not. I tried to limit this to the letter of intent specifically, and was also very intentional around only including questions and answers that we've discussed. And as I've been doing with the questions that come in, if there's anything that comes up that I don't feel like we've discussed, I'll bring it to the full committee. But as of right now, I've directed people to subscribe to the newsletter or the email listserv for future updates, especially when it comes to the timing of the full grant proposal.
I'm fine with not. Yeah, I'm fine with not adding it. We have discussed it before, and of course the answer is we don't know. We have not made a decision on how frequently we will do an open call for applications. But I think that makes sense what you've just said, that this is really addressing the letter of intent. But I just wondered. No problem. No problem.
Any other questions?
So just down to the 3 minutes, Haley, the minute, in terms of the next 2 weeks from today, our agenda.
Oh, yeah. We have 3 minutes.
And Mary, you want to just sort of lay out what you see as the next steps?
Yeah, so I think so. Next week on the 20th is the full council meeting. If we were to meet again in 2 weeks, that would be the 25th. On my agenda, the biggest things that we need to finalize, hopefully the letter of intent evaluation will be finalized on the 20th. The grant scoring rubric also needs to be discussed, and we've already started those discussions. So I hope we can finalize a process pretty quickly. And then the reporting requirements and the outcome metrics, as we've heard from both organizations, we'll need to establish those before we put the grant out, or at least that's the recommendation. So I think with that said, and given the 28th as the deadline for the letter of intent, it would be helpful if we could meet on the 25th one last time to finish up any grant application sort of process discussions, so that we can ensure we're ready for the July meeting to publish that or be close to publishing it. And then I think after that, once we have the letter of intent, we can move forward with discussing how we'll divide, those meetings. I think based on the template that was described and our previous discussions, it sounds like the committee is comfortable with doing individual or separate letter of intent evaluations, and then everyone can send it to me and I can sort of aggregate those and run the analyses. So I don't think it'll be necessary to meet each time we look at, the applications or do scoring. Certainly when we do it as a group, but I think we can work individually.
I put a draft agenda in the chat. Will you and Joe just look at it real quick before I post it on the website?
It
I'm also
looks
cognizant
great,
that it's
Haley.
summer.
Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
I'm also cognizant that it's summer, and so if the 25th is a hard date for folks, or if folks anticipate being away before 4th of July or anything, certainly let us know, because if we don't have a quorum, then we can reschedule.
So I would just the last item, and kind of in this, we're in the same, Mary and I, we're kind of in the line. I think we just have to add a last agenda item, just if you could put meeting schedule, and then we're good.
I have a
Okay.
question, and this might be a Haley AG question that can be answered later, but are we allowed to direct source like some of this work to one of those organizations or somebody else? Because I just it's a lot of work and not a lot of time. And if we have to send out a RFP, that's going to take a long time, and we're going to be through the first grant application, it seems like. So are we allowed to direct source some of this work?
I'm not quite sure what direct source means.
Just hire somebody?
As opposed to putting out an RFP or an RFI?
Yes.
Courtney,
I don't know.
I mean, we must, because we directly hired that other lady, the doctor.
Kim.
Yeah,
Yep, that's true.
I don't see why not. I think it's just a matter of consensus of who to hire and how to get that information of the research of figuring out who would be best for the council.
Courtney, there's also, because we have to follow certain state procurement guidelines, there's a limit to how much the amount we can request for a sole source. So I think if it's below that amount and I can research what it is, then at least based on the logistics of transferring funding from the Maine Recovery Fund to another account, we should be able to do that. So I'll just research what that limit is to make sure we fall underneath that.
Okay, I just feel like we got to talk about that soon, because they could be helping us literally today with all the work that we have.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's I already talked to Pat about including that as part of the agenda for the 20th, because I think our timeline won't move forward in the way that we want it to, with the current limitations of staffing and resources. So they clearly know what they're talking about and are experts in this work, and I think would be wonderful for the council to hire in some capacity to support us in this process.
I know I'm putting us over, but is there any way that we could just ask them for a proposal? Never mind, that's a bad idea, and we don't have enough time to talk about it, so never mind. We'll talk about it on the 20th.
Yeah, I think the RFP was also going to be targeted towards specific organizations or people that we could hire, so that it would be sort of we would get 2 proposals or 3 proposals or something and then choose from those. But I feel like it might make more sense to direct source, as you just suggested. But I don't think it would be an open call for applications.
Gordon.
I think I think a more urgent need is to start looking around for external evaluators, external reviewers who might be willing to do this as volunteers, or we can pay them. But I think that's, we're going to need them very soon, I think. I mean, we don't know, we haven't pressed Mary on how many applications there are or anything. And but that's why I think whether we go to one organization and ask, gee, we could go to MEHAF, I suppose, and say, could you ask your external reviewers whether they'd be willing to help us? I just think we need to be thinking about that, because I think that need's going to come up. It's here now already. I mean, it's going to come up very quickly after the 28th, particularly if we need to train them and have a session with them along with our internal people. So I really like what Frank said, 3 internal people, some external people, but we don't have any external people yet. So I just want to leave you with that thought. Sorry to take you over.
We would need a vote from the full council too before we started that process, because we've already voted that this committee would assess the LOIs. So we would need to amend that motion, likely with the full council.
Then I would ask if you could, if one of you could convey to the chair that I'd like to have that on the agenda as a possibility for to vote on the 20th.
Yeah, I can send out the wording of the old motion too.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I can reach out to some organizations, including the ones who presented today, just to gauge if that's something that they would have the bandwidth or interest to do. So to have that information for the 20th. Great, and I'll send out the letter of intent process recommendation for you all to review. Just a heads up, and as a reminder, whenever something is sent out, including this, please direct any replies to me directly, so that we can save any conversation until we're together as a full group and we're not conversing over email.
Great
Awesome.
conversation, great meeting. Thank you, Mary. Great job, great presentations, very impressive. So we will see you all on the 20th.
Thanks all. Have a good evening.